the enterprise itself, larger enterprise. And this is where enterprises themselves, especially if they had any sort of history, tend to be very fragmented. And so how you pull those pieces together, and today you solve small pieces of it, and the venture industry certainly does that, but how they get integrated in the enterprise becomes a significant challenge, and one where you're looking for how you gain scale in here. Fourth big area is energy and sustainability. And certainly with the big focus on sustainability and climate change and the like, looking for radical disruptions with new sources of power, how we become more efficient in power, new materials, very unique methods in carbon capture that are really driving. And I do think this will be the sustaining part of our focus on climate. There will be an impact by certainly having regulation and putting funding in place, but it's going to take venture capital industry, private equity industry, large corporates in order to drive the innovation needed to sustain the changes we need. Next one is acceleration of space tech. Now, this is one that gets a lot of news, and a lot of people obviously launching themselves into space and bringing their companies there. And we're seeing more and more of these companies coming in the space domain, solving very unique problems in space. And for themselves, they're worth watching, certainly worth investing in where you get the opportunity. But there's the downstream effects of this as well. And much of this started in the early days of NASA, where the technologies that were used to solve the problems there ended up becoming much, much larger than the actual solution that they had. And this is in the form of materials, in the form of propulsion, even in the form of food tech. And so watching not only how space tech evolves, but how the fundamental technologies behind space tech bring us into come into other solutions will be a big one for us. And then finally, it's how these base technologies cross all these domains. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is really a key one. Trust, cybersecurity, these base technologies that cut across all industries end up being some of the more radical ones. And this is why, and Lou did a fantastic job highlighting this, edge-based machine learning technologies are really taking off, and they're becoming critical part of an overall AI machine learning approach. So let's go to the next slide, which is my last one. And I wanted to highlight just a few things and maybe contrast and compare the venture capital industry versus some of the challenges you see within large corporations. And the first one is one that's become much more apparent over the years, and that is capturing and utilizing your own data. People tend to think, and you need to have data in order to really, exploit those opportunities within the large corporate. The problem is people don't look closely enough about the data that they already own. And sometimes it's not sexy data, it may not be user data, but it can be machine-related data, sensor-related data, data about how the enterprise itself runs. And understanding the core nature of that has become a big topic that has dominated, certainly at HP as well as other companies I've worked with, that has really become front and center. Second is that digital transformation, because you have the data, but the digital transformation here I want to emphasize is twofold. It is both horizontal and vertical, as well as the workflow itself through to supply chain. And what I mean by that is large corporates today have small pieces of their enterprise that are transformed, but they don't have entire parts of their corporation. And what they ultimately need is to be able to go from sourcing and material information and product data all the way through a product launch into supply chain and including into your marketing programs as well. And it not only has to transform that, but it has to go across things like your marketing department, your finance, your HR. And these problems are not solved. These are problems that corporates are really struggling with. The third one is rethinking the workforce overall. Now that has gotten really forced with COVID and kind of COVID reality, where we've having to work remote and we keep having to adjust. But another big impact on there has just been the shortage of workers that we see. And obviously in the US, it's estimated 4 million people dropped out of the workforce, or certainly have not been able to locate where the 4 million people went post-COVID. But I know there's similar challenges that go on in Singapore in terms of finding the right people to do these, to actually drive some of these programs forward. And what that drives is, in order to solve that, it is going to be a higher degree of automation. We're already going down an automation path, and artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics itself, we're driving a lot of that automation. But now that's going to get accelerated. As the workforce, we suddenly figure out that we're short, that automation will start driving much higher degrees. That's the only way we're going to get the productivity that's necessary going forward. Fourth, which is just the post-COVID reality. We are going to live in a different world. It will not return to what it was like pre-COVID. And we see it in everyday things like our communication mechanisms, Zoom and other video communication mechanisms. But we see it in our capital, we're going to see it in capital expenditures. In other words, because we're doing more remote and a percentage of the population will stay remote, the more that happens, then people are going to start pulling back from capital expenditures like buildings, to house people, offices, aspects like this. And if there's one thing that I feel has not shaken out in our current markets, and I think we're going to watch it over the next 3 to 5 years, it is what happens to the commercial real estate market. What happens to those markets as we rebalance people being at home, living in different cities, and what happens to that space. It's one area that I'm probably the most concerned about. And finally, the last one, which I will impart, and it's just super key for corporates, large corporates, is always trying to find this balance between disruption and scale. And disruption itself can be very novel and solve unique problems that are necessary for the enterprise to succeed. But you always have to ask yourself, how do I make that scale? How do I turn it into something that can work across a $50 billion industry as opposed to working in, a small silo? And that becomes kind of a key piece. So I wanted to highlight a few of these because we have to keep in balance where all the disruption and the opportunities are, and it has to be matched back with how do we actually deploy them and get the scale and financial returns that we're looking for. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Tech, hopefully give you a little insight from Silicon Valley.
Thank you, Shane. Can we invite the panelists, Lou and Davey, to come on board? Turn your video on. So I think since Shane, you just finished your pitch, I'll ask you the first question. You have the luxury of working in Asia as well as in Silicon Valley. What's your personal take on the various cities' approach to tech innovation and commercialization?
Well, so many of the technologies themselves are common across the regions. I mean, whether it was in the US or it's in Asia or Europe or others. So then they may be amplified in certain regions, but they generally tend to be prevalent across. I will say the most unique thing I have found, and I lived in Singapore, and I've worked with Singapore now for the last 30 years. And Singapore has a very unique advantage you do not see, or you see in very few places in the world. And that is the cooperation, the collaboration that goes on between government entities and sponsoring boards like EDB is one example. Universities where fundamental primary research can go on, and then corporations, including startups as well as large companies. And the government itself helps support those working together. And it becomes, I think, a very unique advantage. I sometimes worry that Singapore itself hasn't fully internalized the advantage they have on that. But I would really emphasize, you don't see that in very many other places.
Okay, thank you. So next question is for Lou. What about the tech sector that attracts you and your team? Or is it, do you actually join the tech sector before investing, or the other way around?
Yeah, so my journey has been used to be material science researcher. So I started my tech journey at Stanford, did lots of super nerdy research related to the biosensor, nano thin film sensor, even lithium ion battery. So I was an energy guy as well. And later had my first transition to entrepreneur. So commercialize one of my patent technology and build a medical device company. I was very lucky to be able to build at a very young age, start company as solo founder at the age of 21, with all the support from my fellow advisor, Stanford University, and also investor, and eventually sold my company to Boston Scientific. So that's my experience as entrepreneur. And after I sold my company, I started to so-called went to the dark side, start to do investment. With personal investment, I got pretty good success. And initially, my focus has been deep tech and healthcare because I saw great founder technology already. You believe it or not, back in 2014, there's great founder in the deep tech sector talk about digital transformation. That's not a new thing. It's just the VC was still fascinating about business model and the consumer application back in 2014, 2015. I also spent a year in a larger VC firm across the stage doing different type of investment, but my passion is within deep tech and healthcare until 2015. That's when I launched Fusion Fund. So that's kind of a very long answer to your short questions.
Okay, so I'll ask the Dark Vader on the dark side, Davey. Why will you invest in a tech company?
Why would I invest in a tech company?
Yes.
Like I say, if you look at the slide I showed earlier, the amount of capital has gone into software company. And if you look at the top company in the world, largest company in the world today, you have the Tesla of the world, you have the Apple of the world, you have the Alphabet / Google of the world, Micro. They are the largest company in the world. They are bigger than ExxonMobil. They're bigger than. So if you look at it, tech is the way to go. And what Shane and Lou has mentioned earlier, there are a lot of potential, more innovation coming along the way. And that will drive higher productivity, that will change the lifestyle, that will affect how we interact with the climate as well. So technology is definitely the future and the way to go. So there's no question about it. Just looking at the amount of return generated by those companies, look at Zoom. We're using Zoom today, right? Zoom has skyrocketed accordingly. And thereafter, a lot of companies has followed them as well, trying to create Zoom-like platform accordingly.
Okay. Okay, then I'll come back to you again, Shane. You were the CTO of a blue chip tech company, Hewlett Packard, right? So what made you take the plunge to join the investment side of things, and how is life different for you now that you're wearing a different hat?
Well, I've actually been involved in a lot of the venture side for a while. I started my own company many years ago, venture backed out of the Bay Area at Intel Capital. I worked at Intel Capital for a number of years. And then I started HP Tech Ventures, the HP's corporate venturing arm as well. So moving into the venture side was pretty natural direction for me to go, and where I had a lot of personal interest. And then Lou and I actually did a couple co-investments and worked together over the last several years. So when I decided to step down as CTO, that became an obvious place to go focus, was go see if I could help out Lou, and as well as some other private equity areas. I will say I have thoroughly enjoyed it. Life comes in stages, and you have to enjoy those stages. And the great thing about post CTO is I get a chance to work on a variety of things and have a little bit more diversity in what I work on, as opposed to staying on the same treadmill doing the same thing over and over again.
Okay, since you are part of a team, so Lou, you are basically a very successful entrepreneur, considering being an Asian in the Western Hemisphere. What are your challenges, along your journey, and how will you advise Asians who seek similar successes, in that part of the world?
Yeah, so definitely there are lots of challenges that when I initially start, I kind of uncheck out the box, like too young, minority, female doing a healthcare company. So stereotype definitely, and also some discrimination, but I think everyone, all the immigrants facing that. I think for me, on one side, it's really the cultural personality I came from as a Mongolian. We're not afraid of challenge, always fight a battle. Another thing is I really have strong conviction for what I want to do with my technology solution, and also the change on to drive in the industry and also in the society. So that's how I start. And later, I think I'm very lucky to be able to really have a like a great partner joining me and supporting me, including like Shane. It's a really great pleasure that we have Shane joining us last year. And also, for example, as he mentioned about his background, you found it's quite unique. It's very hard to find someone like Shane. Not only he has strong technical background, he has strong investment experience. He also understands very well how Fortune 500 company or Fortune 50 company doing their innovation internally on the board level, how to align everyone's interest to integrate new solution, and how to push the digital transformation in the large corporate and the potential working with a smaller startup, which make him, I was like, oh, you're a perfect investor. And also you're gonna be a great supporter to the founder. So I was very lucky to have founder, partner at Shane, also have other partner joining me. So I think that's also the key thing of building a successful, no matter it's VC or startup company, building an A-star team. So I started by myself, but a year later I started to put together the team. And I think regardless is Asian or other immigrant, it's very important to find the right mindset people and that you could trust, you could rely on, and be able to achieve the big goal together. It's never about one person show.
Thank you, Lou. Indeed, great minds think alike. Okay, so Davey, you are in a unique position among the panelists because you get to see a lot of Asian techs, as well as some of the Western tech, especially in the listed space. What's your thoughts on what's the differentiation, and any thoughts on how Asia can keep up, or is Asia already there?
I think if you put in a framework, in terms of pharmaceutical, I think you have the Swiss, the European side are very, very strong, right? In terms of e-commerce, transportation, technology, software development type, the US, North America is very, very strong. Now, if you look at fintech itself, China probably ranked the top itself. So if you look at opportunity itself, right, this is how I would map it. Then look at Southeast Asia itself. Southeast Asia has a lot of, population-wise, a lot. There's a lot of opportunity for logistics support, e-commerce type, because there are a lot of buying type. So if I was to invest, I would look at that parameter and where I would invest in terms of the specialized sector accordingly. So that's how I would do that, right? So pharma, I will look at the Swiss. E-commerce, technology, I will look at the US. Fintech, I will look at China accordingly. Now, there are startup fintech in Indonesia and the like, still create opportunity itself because they do have the market, right? But if you say purely for technology-wise, that is where the region I will look at for the respective sector.
Okay, thank you. So I will pose some of the questions that were sent from the audience. James asked, how are nano robots manufactured? Is Dragonfly from Nano Dimension a potential machine to 3D print such a product?
Yeah, definitely 3D. I could quickly answer that one. So 3D printing definitely is a very interesting technology, and also the progress of 3D printing also contributed to the faster growing of the space tech industry. Actually, we're also very proud investor into SpaceX, and we know they use lots of metal 3D printing for their, for example, turbine used to be 3 pieces. Now they print everything into 1 piece, so there are no kind of there are no issue in terms of when you're sampling parts together, which also help them doing better recycling when they recollect the turbine to use it again. And for the nano robot, definitely there's a possibility to use a 3D printing technology when the resolution could get smaller and smaller. But now when I talk about nanofiber powered nano robots, nanofiber itself is already small enough. We just try to fabricate, for example, using tool like MBE, be able to fabricate a nanofiber, then be able to make a nanofiber powered nano robots. So there's lots of great technology from semiconductor industry already are capable of supporting the potential manufacturing of nano robots.
Okay, CP asked a few questions, so I will just zoom in on the healthcare portion. He was saying that regarding healthcare product development, R&D takes a long time, clinical trials, 5 to 10 years, which requires substantial funding to keep the day-to-day operations running. how does a venture capital fund feature in such a such a long-term investment?
Sure, I could take
It's
it
probably
again.
you,
So
yeah.
yes. So yeah, you're right. Some of type of healthcare company definitely require, they're capital intensive. They're definitely long-term investment, especially anything related to pharma, anything related to therapeutic solution. That's also the reason, as a fund manager, we also need to be practical in terms of thinking about timing of financial return. So we're more focused on diagnostic. So for diagnostic, the good thing is it's much faster than for them to get FDA approval. For example, in the United States, typical taking 18 months, but we have our experience and also network help majority of our company get FDA approval within half a year. So the Medical I mentioned, they got 3 FDA approval around Series A stage. It's hard to imagine a healthcare company could get so many FDA approval at such an early stage. So they're ready for commercialization. They could generate revenue even at earlier stage. So amount of capital they really require are much less compared with therapeutic device and also pharma company. Another thing is related to the technology innovation. For example, back in 2015, microfluidic chip is very expensive. So for any company want to use it, yes, it's expensive, but now it's much cheaper. So for any company want to use it, the cost of the technology is much cheaper already. Another thing is integration cost of the technology is getting lower as well. So lots of the traditional, for example, we talk about deep tech, we talk about hardware, we talk about healthcare, people, the first impression is, oh, it's so capital intensive. It's actually not anymore. So with all this low cost sensor everywhere, we're able to provide a very smart, high technical barrier, low cost hardware related solution to the market. Another thing is when you compare the cost of the investment, amount of investment for early stage hardware software integration company with an enterprise company, actually it might be the similar amount of investment for company achieve similar number of the revenue. And for lots of enterprise companies, especially just the SaaS application tool, it's very low technical barrier. So it requires lots of capital investing in order to do the PR marketing and the penetration, user acquisition. But for lots of the healthcare company with a high technical barrier, yes, they require some capital for technology commercialization, but once they have that barrier, they have the stage built up, they will be quickly dominate the market and become the winner.
Okay, thank you. Since Shane, you're in Texas, there's a Texas question for you. What do you think of the current trend of leaving Silicon Valley and move to places such as Texas? How do we reinvent Silicon Valley?
Yeah, well, so to be clear, I happen to be in Texas today because I sit on a board of directors in Dallas, so I'm just here for a couple of days. I don't live in Texas, but I do think the question is a very relevant one, and I do think it's a challenge for Silicon Valley and other places. Is the challenges in Silicon Valley are, it is a very expensive place to live, which can make it difficult to attract and retain talent in Silicon Valley. And it has a tax structure that is starting to actually impinge upon the ability of companies to succeed. And so as a result, you're seeing large companies, many of them, exit to other places, including Texas as one example, but it's also to overseas locations as other examples as well. And I do think it's one that has got to be focused on from Silicon Valley. It's got to come from policies at the government level. I think in order to adapt to some of this, it's got to free up corporates in here, and there's going to have to be some work to address cost of living. If you spend any time in Silicon Valley, if there was a concerning side of it, it's looking at the way some of the people live who are trying to do support services for the people in the valley itself, and it's going to have to be addressed for it to be long-term sustainable, in my belief.
Yeah, I also want to quickly add on to that. Another thing you can see from Fusion Fund, from 2016, we actually have 40% of the company outside of Silicon Valley. On one side is the reason Shane just mentioned. Another thing is when we look at a digital transformation, it's not only for Google, Facebook, tech company, it's also for the traditional sector. Then where does this logistic company, insurance company, headquarter base? It's outside Silicon Valley. So it's always nice for founder to stay close with their customer. On the other side, Silicon Valley is still maintained as a center for tech commercialization. Not necessarily all the tech innovation is originally from Silicon Valley, but that's a place with high density of the capital, with very good go-to-market, 0 to 1 market community for founder to really find the product market fit. But since then, they could also build a more kind of distributed team, which COVID also helped. Like Shane mentioned, not only we see company right now, they typically have an office in Silicon Valley, and mainly for kind of customer facing and fundraising. They also have engineering team, probably for example in Pittsburgh, even like in India, even in Toronto. So this type of arrangement really helps founder balance out the cost of labor, cost of operation, and meanwhile still benefit from all this innovation energy from the Silicon Valley. So that's also the thing we're seeing are doing very successfully across the United States, and also be able to boost all different new innovation center in different cities. And we're very lucky have a strong presence in all these cities since 2016.
Thank you. So this next question is from Thompson. I think it's meant for you, Davey, then later maybe Lou can jump in. How do you decide what to invest in?
Number one, I think myself, I look at, there are many factors to look at, but for us, we rate 4 factors that we look at. Number one, the credibility and performance track record of the management team. That's number one. Followed by the business model. People tend to look at the business model first, but for us, the credibility and the track record of the founders and the management team is very, very important, because we want to deal with the right people. We don't just focus on the business model. People tend to, and it's the hardest to do. Assessing the quality of the management team is not easy, right? We rank integrity as number one, versus the knowledge base. So we look at the management team, we look at the business model. Thereafter, we look at how the business model is going to affect by the economic environment. So if you look at COVID itself, Moderna, Pfizer done very well, but you look at the aviation industry done very badly, right? So we look at how the economic cycle affects the particular investment company that we're looking to invest. Last but not least is regulation itself. How particular government regulation is affecting that company. If you can see, the impact of government regulation in China now is driving a lot of unique valuation to a lot of companies. So we are very mindful of how government, the macro stuff affects the company. So in a nutshell, there are many factors we look at, but the key factors are management, followed by the business model. Then we look at economic climate. Then we look at government regulation. These are the 4 key elements that we look at.
Sure. Yeah. So I think there's also a different way of doing the PE investment and also VC investment, but also lots of similarity in terms of look at the micro and the macro. And I think for us, especially for early stage VC, the first thing is really build our own conviction in terms of specific industry or trend we want to invest. Because the problem for us, like the whole investment industry, is like there's so many buzzwords, so much information. So if an investor always chase after the buzzword, I'm very confident to tell you that this investor will never really invest into the big opportunity. So building up our own strategy, our conviction into the sector and the technology trend we choose to invest is very important. It's not like, okay, someone invests in crypto, everyone rushing to invest in crypto. Has to find out this is the sector we're expert, we have domain knowledge, we also have strong differentiation. To specific company, and we definitely, VC is all about evaluating the risk profile, whether this is the risk level we could accept. From, as David mentioned, the market risk to product risk, technology risk, founder risk, execution risk, and exit risk. What is a potential exit scenario for this company? IPO, merge acquisition, how long it would happen? And also go back to market risk. That's also the thing I want to highlight a little bit. In Silicon Valley, there are so many technical founders, they think we have the best technology in the whole world. We're for sure gonna win. But the issue is all this like new trend we're talking about, technology been there for many years. The key thing is really understand the best market timing to invest in the technology, to invest right before the turning point. So for us, when we evaluate the market risk, not only the market size, not only need to be big enough, Also, we want to see the market timing. That's also the part initially, Shane now is the president of our Saxo network. And before that, we've been working closely on that already. That's the reason we're having this Saxo network is we want to understand what's going on in the industry. All the CTO from Global 1000 companies, they know the market timing and we know the technology. Combine the information together, we will be able to identify the best timing for us to put in capital for early stage tech innovation.
Okay, Helena asked a question. Do you always pick up winners or occasionally brought into some not so successful companies? What factors do you consider? It's a bit of overlap from earlier questions. What factors do you consider when you sieve out potential winners? I think we will start from Shane on this.
Well, so no, you don't always. I mean, it would be great if you had perfect insight, and the only ones that you're really picking up are the ones that are going to be, the winners themselves. I mean, what you try and do, and I think, Lou did a very good job, and Davey did a very good job, is, establish a set of criteria early on that help you have better odds that the one you pick is going to be, has a chance of success. But frankly, it's also a law of numbers a bit as well. And especially in the early stage. In the early stage, when it's much higher risk and you don't have things proven out, a lot of investments, knowing that some of them are going to fail becomes very important.
Davey, any thoughts?
A lot of thoughts, but I just want to be, how do I put it, a bit of paradigm shift. Even though we invest in failure companies, don't forget the multiplier impact on the economy as well, right? So let's assume out of 10 companies, you get 4 companies right, you got 6 companies wrong, but the 6th company itself has a domino effect to supporting industry. So it's not like the money invested is all gone. It may affect something else, secondary impact as well. So I look from a much more macro perspective, right? As I like to see that it's positive contribution to the economy rather than labeling as 6 fail, 4 succeed accordingly, right? It has that impact at this point in time. Sometimes technology is not ready at this point in time. Like you say, the iPad, Apple had it long time ago, but it failed, but now it's taking off. So sometimes it's not ready, the market is not ready. So it may not be just a failure, right? But so I don't like to put in bucket, but from a financial perspective, you can say 4 succeed, 6 fail, but there's a lot more implication to that.
Yeah, I probably just add a little bit more. As Shane mentioned early on, as early stage investor, there's no way you could always picking the winners. I think there's 2 things very important for early stage investor, at least we think. The first thing is we need to do self-reflection and also do keep self-monitoring. I think there's sometimes we see ego among investors. They think, oh, we're always right. We're the one decide on the future trend. No, the future trend was built and pushed by the founder, and the VC were catalysts. So we kind of realize that, as she mentioned, it's very important that we need to know that some company may fail, but how we learn from it. So for us, from the day one, what we did is we build a database, track all the company we invest, we did not invest, and what's going on with company we did not invest. We want to do self-monitoring. If we miss out a good opportunity, then what is the learning, how we could be better? I think that's very important for early stage investors. Is we need to have self-awareness and also self-reflection and be able to self-monitor to get better. Another thing is really consider the high risk profile of early stage investment. What else we can do to reduce the risk? That's the part I mentioned early on. We also do a lot of evaluation in terms of risk, exit risk. When we're investing in a company, we already are considered how to exit this company. IPO, that's definitely going to be IPO. That will be the breakout company. But if through merge acquisition, who are the potential buyer? Even when, yes, we see some company, okay, they're not growing as fast as we expected, but they have great technology. That's the benefit of investing tech company versus the consumer company. Well, consumer company has no user, there's no value for merge acquisition. But for a tech company, worst case, the downside protection, we could try to sell the IP to get some principal back. So I think that's another thing very important. Knowing something may happen, then we could prepare in advance instead of wait till, oh, the company really suffer, it's too late to do any work. So that's the part. Not only we put lots of effort for investment, we also put lots of effort into the post-investment portfolio management.
Okay, thank you. We are mindful of the lunch time of the delegates, so we will ask one last question. Which sectors within the tech industry have the most potential in the next 5 to 10 years? And if you have any last thoughts to add, feel free to add. We'll start off with Davey on this.
I think I think for me, in terms of pharma, I think there are a lot of potential. Like for me, we're looking at stem cells, right? To me, it's probably the elixir of a lot of medical issue, right? So we are seriously looking at some of the stem cells technology, that we are very keen at, right? But in terms of today, I mean, a lot of investment into blockchain as well. We're quite keen to look at and see how it transforms the banking sector accordingly.
Shane?
Yeah, it's probably hard to pick any one. I mean, there are a few areas that I'm probably particularly excited about. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, reaching a scale point, and what's going on the edge as a complement to what was in the cloud, I think is a very big one. I mentioned digital manufacturing, which is 3D printing at scale for manufacturing purposes. It is another one that I probably think a lot about. And I do think blockchain is another one, and not from a crypto standpoint. I actually think blockchain, as it relates to some privacy issues, as well as some other implementations, I think it's rather interesting. But like I say, it's hard to probably choose one. That's a great thing about the time we live in. There's so many different opportunities right now.
Lou?
Yes, as Shane said, it's a really exciting moment. That's the reason like you see us as a tech investor in Silicon Valley, although we're working from home, we're so busy. Like for Fusion Fund, we doubled the size of the team during COVID because there's so many great technology innovation happening right now. So it's really going through the singularity points. Amazing time. So if I need to see just the pick from, as Shane mentioned, there's so many of them. Probably two things. First thing is really within healthcare. I'm super passionate about healthcare. I'm also seeing big opportunity in the next 5 to 10 years for anything related to mental disease, neurology disease, because we don't have much solution, much progress in the past 20 years, but we're getting there. We're using lots of new solutions, be able to understand our brain better, how memory work, why we have dementia, and all this anxiety and also depression. Depression is not just a psychology problem, it's also a neurology problem, how we resolve it. I think that's the really, really big opportunity we're seeing right now. Another thing, also there's lots of good industry, Shane and David mentioned already. Another thing is really the space tech. Now, yes, we already have very good technology for rocket launching. And another thing is people saw the Starlink program, Starlink project is deploying so fast. So not only we're gonna have all these satellites in the universe, in the future, we may have AWS in the universe. Imagine as an individual and also as a company, now you have access to the data on the cloud, on Earth. But if one day we have all this cheap access to everything happening in the universe, there are so many applications you could imagine. That's another industry I think gonna boom dramatically in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining this session. We hope you enjoy. We will have the next session of a Silicon Valley Tech Series to come. Please watch your space. In the meantime, enjoy your lunch and take care. We are logging off now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tech.
Thank you, Lou, Shane, David. Yep. Please hold on.